Greetings, I'm Laura Puccia Valtorta. Welcome to a new episode of my podcast, B is for Bisexual, Season 3, Episode 1, a story entitled Saint Turtle. Welcome to 2025. This is a story about new beginnings and new religions. I don't wish dystopia on anyone, but if we're forced to regress, let's put up a good fight. Reading with me today are my son, Dante.
Ciao.
And my husband, Marco.
Buongiorno.
I'm an attorney and a content creator. My films include Bermuda, a wacky comedy, Disability, and the Disease Detective series, along with many others available on Amazon and the Tubi channel. A shout out to listeners in California, New York, Frankfurt, Germany, Hong Kong, and South Carolina. Dear listener, at the end of this episode, I will tell you something about the process of indie filmmaking, which is one of my passions. And now, Saint Turtle. $1,002,036. That was the balance in Giovanna's account after somebody left her $1 million. She was stunned for a moment before she remembered that money alone was not going to break the dictatorship. In fact, capitalism was killing the planet. They had to stay strong. They had to keep fighting. The bank manager told her,
"You don't need to take out a $50,000 loan for your business. You have enough in your account already to rent factory space."
Strange advice from a bank manager for sure, but Muhammad Ali Hussein was not like the others. Giovanna felt he looked after her, maybe because her husband had died in the war and her father had been deported, and she was raising Cecil, 10 years old, and Domenica, 8 years old, on her own. She suspected it was her mother, Carmen, who had sent the cash. She hadn't seen her mom in 18 months. Carmen, a filmmaker with socialist leanings, had left the new state before they threw her in prison. "Come with me, bring the children," she had pleaded with Giovanna, hands flailing on the day she left. But Giovanna thought it was better to stay on the inside and fight. Beg with the leaders not to be afraid of powerful women or a true recording of history, or forget that every person on earth needed help from everybody else. They were living in a time of darkness. With the university gone and her teaching post obliterated, Giovanna had no choice but to start businesses. She chose to initiate an underground newsletter, The Slam, written poorly by her, a mathematician, and then a factory that produced small portable protection devices, exploding pickleballs. The newsletter was popular, encrypted, and illegal, so she engineered the pickleballs with red pepper powder inside as a kind of money laundering excuse to explain why she had money. The government kept track of who had what. The pickleballs were easy to carry, and they worked at stopping dogs and humans. They worked fine at temporary immobilization. Nobody got killed or hurt. Giovanna and the children lived in a converted barn with no heat or air. There was a concealed cellar beneath it stocked with food and supplies and a swimming pond in back. It had an upstairs space for her office. The children played outside a lot. She spent part of her day reteaching the children history to supplement the patriarchal palaver they learned in school. That and the real biology. Her lessons included slavery and Reconstruction, Frederick Douglass, the suffrage movements, redlining, McCarthyism, and the general misconception that humans were anything more than a single species, but were all pretty much alike. She saved time by using these lessons as the basis for her newsletter. On the outside, the Slam looked like recipes and beauty tips. People paid her money for the decoding app, the cleaner, And then, after sleeping, the real stories came out, the important stuff, the suffering and the ignorance, the triumphs. The great writers that no one should ever forget, like Margaret Atwood, Richard Price, Octavia Butler, and Liz Moore.
To understand our history, you must read the Oryx and Crake trilogy. The great Margaret Atwood, the goddess of our time, foretold the dictatorship of capitalism, the overtaking of our government by greed and consumption. Let us return to simpler lives with democracy rather than hierarchy and reverse the destruction of our planet. That was a good episode of The Slam,
Hossein told her.
But you need to write realism rather than fiction.
It was a lonely life for Giovanna. No husband. And Jason had been her best friend. All the surviving scientists and mathematicians moved to China or Europe. Mexico City became a literary and artistic haven. Several of Giovanna's American friends sided with the new state, however. They supported capitalism and gasoline cars. They yearned for a new life, 1950s style, with big skirts and crazy repressed families, meat and potatoes. Make the 2050s like the 1950s. What Giovanna heard was, "Keep women down." She feared for her daughter Domenica, who liked math and skateboarding, and Cecil, who was a humanist at heart. Giovanna was a vegetarian who never went to church. She wasn't an advocate of dictating to others how to live. Todd, the turtle guy, came over to gossip. Besides Daisha, the hairdresser, Todd was her only friend. He once had taught zoology at the university. Now he raised turtles in his basement and sold them. People, even capitalist nincompoops, still wanted pets.
How's it going?
He asked Giovanna, drinking coffee at her big wooden table.
Fine,
said Giovanna.
I have $1 million.
Whoa,
said Todd. He took a sip of coffee.
And what will you do with that?
Giovanna sensed from the gleam in his eyes that Todd was looking for money for his turtles. He had 200 of them, and his partner, Rashad, was pressuring him to sell them to labs and soup kitchens as well as pet enthusiasts. Rashad, an electric car salesman, was supporting them both.
I don't know,
said Giovanna.
I only need $50,000 for the pickleball factory. Maybe saved for the kids' education?
There are no more universities,
Todd pointed out.
How about investing in my turtles' welfare? Todd's Turtle Haven, so I can keep them instead of selling them to research labs. Every time I sell one, I get really sad.
I don't know,
said Giovanna.
We could use a couple of extra turtles in our pond.
Cecil and Domenica loved their pond. The children learned more outdoors than they did in their patriarchal schools.
I could start up a school,
said Giovanna.
Against the law,
Todd reminded her.
What you're doing at home, teaching the children out of ratty books and old documentaries, that could already get you in jail.
I don't know,
said Giovanna.
I wish my mom and dad were here.
Giovanna's dad, a mathematician nicknamed Pizzo, had been a popular professor and father figure at the university when the new state decided he was dangerous for opposing a war against Muslims. Pizzo was not a Muslim, he was a Catholic, but he was also a humanist who championed the separation of church and state, and many of his math colleagues had been Muslims. Once Pizzo was disappeared by the new state, her mother, Carmen, decided it was time for them both to leave. Giovanna did not know whether either of them was dead or alive. Now, a year and a half later, she really wished they would communicate. Hussein had brought his children over to swim in the pond. Daisha was styling Todd's hair in Giovanna's front yard when a large converted school bus sporting a solar panel parked in the front yard. It ran over one of Giovanna's rose bushes. Carmen got out, looking sweaty and disheveled. "Phew," she said. "We don't have enough solar power for air conditioning."
Climate change is killing us,
said Todd, sauntering over. "Grandma," Cecil rushed over to hug her. Domenica hung back for a moment and then rushed forward to join in the hug. Now that the moment had arrived, Giovanna was not sure that she was delighted to see her mother. Carmen had always been pushy and know-it-all. Her hair stood up on her head like a giant popover. "Here we are, back home to solve all your problems," announced Carmen. "Got any clean water to drink?" Cecil rushed to the purification system to get her some. Carmen glugged it down like a wanderer. "Your father's asleep in the back of the bus," said Carmen. Giovanna rushed into the bus, where her father was splayed out on the back seat.
Dad!
They embraced each other,
I thought you were in Italy. Mi mancano tu e I bambini.
said Pizzo.
La tua mamma aveva paura di tornare. Thanks for sending $1 million.
Said Giovanna.
But what I really love is having you back home.
Do-do-do-do. Over dinner, they discovered that Carmen and Pizzo had been living in the former state of New Mexico, now a part of Mexico proper. "I looked for the natives," Carmen explained. "You know, the Asians, who settled there 30,000 years ago, in order to learn something about survival."
And did you?
Said Daisha. "You bet. I now have some of the answers, but it's difficult to overcome more than 250 years of colonialism,"
My grandmother was a member of the Choctaw tribe.
said Todd.
She never fit into the United States. It's horrible.
Said Daisha.
Because that's all there is around here. The new state swallows everybody up, ordered around by pie-faced capitalists.
We have no rights.
Said Giovanna.
Banks are king.
Admitted Hussein. "I believe we can fight back," said Carmen, "using magical ways." Giovanna rolled her eyes. She composed a slam episode in her head.
Carmen, my long-lost mother, is back. Is this a blessing or a curse? When will she begin ordering my life? When will she start bossing me around?
Do-do-do-do. After eating soup and homemade bread, they all sat around a fire pit outside. The children drank beer when their parents weren't looking. "I do not partake of fire water," said Carmen. Giovanna glared at her mother.
Fire water? You're Italian-American, Mom. Don't tell me you've turned native.
"All the First Nation people came from Asia, and then they lived here in the Americas for 30,000 years without ruining the environment. We can learn much from them,"
She relies on a tourist village
said Pizzo.
to save the world.
Carmen stood up and spread her arms. She gazed up at the night sky. "Oh, children, tell me your problems," she chanted. Hussein knelt down and his head touched the ground in a prayer stance. Todd raised his hand and stood up. His long braids reached down to his waist.
Sit down, Todd.
Hissed Giovanna.
Well, I love my turtles,
Said Todd.
but everybody wants to buy them and make them into pets or turtle soup. This makes me very sad.
Carmen closed her eyes. She placed her hands on her curly hair for a moment and then stretched them up to the sky. "Oh, great Mother Goddess, give me an answer," she beseeched. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone fetish shaped like a turtle. "Great Mother Earth says to build yourself a temple. The turtles are powerful and holy beings. A turtle once carried the world on its back. Turtles bring wisdom. Create a temple of worship where turtles are sacred. Then people will think twice before eating them." Everyone fell silent for a few minutes. Carmen began singing. "This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land is made for you and me."
But I live in a bungalow
Said Todd.
with my husband.
Rashad raised his hand and looked concerned. Carmen said, "Your husband is a beloved person, but you are the priest of the Turtle Temple."
We have no place to worship.
Carmen closed her eyes. "I saw an abandoned church down the street. Seize it for your temple of worship. The great goddess has given us this building so that you can build the turtle temple. Aye! For the rest of the evening, they planned the new nature religion and how Todd would take over the old Episcopalian church, St. Timothy's. Giovanna offered to contribute $100,000 to buy the building. A cheer rose up.
Yeah!
I have a new name for my church.
Said Todd.
St. Turtles.
Do-do-do-do. Later that night, as Giovanna was setting up mattresses for her parents in the loft, she decided that her mother was only partially crazy.
I like your idea about the turtle temple.
She said,
It will keep Todd busy.
"This sounds like a good friend,"
The closing of the university almost killed him.
said Giovanna.
His students loved him. He couldn't teach ecology anymore.
"St. Turtle will be his new university," said Carmen. "Call it a religion and teach the people conservation on the sly. Turn that old stupidity into a new way of life,"
I want the children to have a good school.
said Giovanna.
Teaching them the new state version of fake history is not teaching them anything at all. I spend too much time finding them the real story from ripped textbooks from the 1960s.
"The people will build a better school if Todd tells them to do it," proclaimed Carmen. "Todd can be a prophet as well as a herpetologist,"
We'll see.
said Giovanna. Pizza was already asleep and snoring. Do-do-do-do. Todd became a popular guy. He said stuff like,
If you need cheap vegetables, plant a garden in your backyard.
and
Build a turtle pond and live a holier life.
lots of people from Jacksonville offered to help him refurbish his new temple. They were mostly professors out of work. Some of them had learned how to frame a house and lay tiles once the borders were closed. "I am so glad you're building a church," said Yulin Ma. "I have built 6 houses since the university closed, but I am tired of it," said Yulin Ma. She had a PhD in philosophy. "Now I can help create a new religion, and women will have a central role." Todd named Yulin a teacher of the turtles. He gave her his textbook, called Turtle's Place in the World, plus a tag and 2 turtles for her living room.
Well, go forth and prosper,
He told her,
and come back in a week to teach Sunday school.
"My children will be part of the class," she told Todd. Rashad was not so happy.
You aren't a priest.
He told Todd, his arms crossed in anger.
You are a herpetologist.
Priest, teacher, university professor, what's the difference?
Said Todd.
If I share respect for nature, I can help save the world.
Do something about the wildfires.
Said Rashad. Smoke from the Canadian fires had covered Alabama with soot for the 5th year in a row. The next Sunday at Mass, Todd invited his congregation to pray for peace in their homes. He told the people,
Trade in your gas-guzzling Nissan for an electric car from Rashad. Help stop the wildfires.
and then Rashad was happy. St. Turtle's sermons went wild on the internet. People all over the new state, Mexico, and Canada did start buying more electric cars. Nevertheless, the wildfires kept burning. People from Mobile, Alabama, moved inland toward Jacksonville to escape coastal flooding. The congregation of St. Turtles swelled to 1,000 people,
This is great.
said Todd to Giovanna.
With all these collections, I can begin to pay you back.
Don't worry about the loan.
Said Giovanna.
If you let my parents live at the church, we can call it even.
Giovanna complained in her blog.
My mother is baking her famous lentil loaf again. The children love it, but I've lost 5 pounds.
Slam readers wrote asking her for the recipe. Do-do-do-do. Once Carmen saw that St. Turtle was thriving, she decided that New Mexico needed her back. "I shall return to the Pueblos," she announced around Thanksgiving time. "Santa Clara is calling me,"
Non è vero.
said Pizza.
Sarebbe meglio rimanere qui. Why don't you let Dad stay?
Pleaded Giovanna.
I need his help with the children.
The children loved both their grandparents, and Pizza was particularly good at drawing and building with Legos. Carmen placed her palms on her forehead and decided what to do. After a moment, she raised her arms to the sky and prayed to the great goddess Margaret Atwood. "Let me return to Albuquerque for the winter," she said. "I can find work at the art museum. Then when things get too hot, I shall return to Alabama."
Yay!
Pizzo shrugged his shoulders. When married to a priestess of the future, it was best to obey her commands. Do-do-do-do. And that's the end. People, these days I'm working on 2 new films, a documentary about artificial intelligence and a narrative comedy entitled Zoom Hit. I have about 12 actors in Zoom Hit, and it's taken me many months to find the actors and convince them to act. But before that, I had to perfect the screenplay so that it's funny, terrible, and has a message. The writing of the screenplay took several years, not months, years. I workshopped my writing at 2 different groups here in South Carolina. Ciao until next time. Have a creative 2025 and keep up the fight.
Ciao.
Arrivederci!
Goodbye.